Suspense is killing me. I hope it lasts.
That is so true. So how is everyone? I haven't heard from. I was expecting to hear from Andrew by now, but I have not. Andrew Hall. Andy sent me a message yesterday, and he was like, "Hey, can we go on the show?" And he wanted to.
Richard sent they just put. I don't know if they just put it up, but he's talking about spherical harmonics. Did he do that in 2017? It looks like it was from 2017.
Oh, Andy?
Andy Hall, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was. If you see him glancing to his left, that's me waving him off the stage after 15 minutes. Like, get the hell out of there!
Okay.
We were all panicking because he went over time.
Okay.
Anyway, but still, it was a good. It was a good talk. I like he was his first with the loops, the basically learning, as Jacob Gable put out a recent video showing an electrode going across the landscape, which is basically what he's talking about. What Andrew was on about, which is just wonderful. Welcome to the August 26th edition of the Electric View. I'm Neil Thompson. Today we have Heather, Buddy, Edwin, and Dave. We will be discussing the Feng Shui, fossilization, and the knowledge lost and hidden during the times of catastrophe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Just seeing what he did there and how Jacob was able to show like a snake going across the land, and that's what Andy was talking about, doing like coronal mass ejections, but on the Earth, and what these loops would look like, and then comparing them to Arches National Monument and noting what would it look like from the outside. And then we started talking about, well, this is after, like before or after, I don't know when he was doing this. We were talking about, because we shared a room, me and Andy, and we were just totally discussing the different aspects of the way that the Earth would process electrons. And one of the things he noted, and he said, why would loops happen? I go, well, if you have a current going across the surface, across the atmosphere of the Earth, it induces below it, and you're going to get little loops. That's something that happens commonly with electricity. You're going to get induced loops, and normally it doesn't matter. It's so small, and you're using microelectronics or whatever. But when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of volts or millions of volts, and you're playing with large swaths of area, I bet you something that would look like a spark is now much larger. So and it makes you wonder about the dragons leaping through the sky, or the dragon lines, or the talk of the carps, the jade carps, the green carps, the 3G green carps that jumped out of the ocean and landed back across the ocean. That's what the Chinese talked about one time. And why? Why would they do that? What were you actually seeing? And of course the ideas of fire-breathing dragons and so forth, become much more realistic, I guess. And he's noting it here. See the loops, and of course,
right.
I was talking about, well, if you do those the top across the ground, you're also going to be doing it underneath the Earth. And then each time you're here, when we talked about cross hatching, and I said, here's a cross hatching. Here's striations in one direction, and then across 90 degrees, or some angle close to 90 degrees in the other direction. And it's because you'll get each one of those loops are induced, but themselves those loops are going to also induce loops at 90 degrees to those loops. And of course those loops underneath are going to do the same thing, and that's where an Arches National Monument comes in, where you get to see it go down to its an induction of an induction of induction of induction,
right,
down to the smaller and smaller scales,
right.
So obviously we're trying to
that's where this
understand
frequency comes up as you start climbing up this Jacob's ladder of frequency too, and it's like, that's fascinating right now.
I think that's I don't know for sure. That's why when we look at stars, we see such a broad spectrum of EM, is because we're not just seeing the overall electricity pumping into it on a certain frequency. Like that's how we control, like we know the aurora or the ionosphere has a certain frequency to it. And if you're relatively within harmonics of that frequency or close to it, you're going to get interference. So radio will break up. We can use it to bounce waves around the Earth and so forth in this channel around the Earth, bouncing off the ground and into space and ground and space and so on. But ham radio. Anyway, but that's what this is where I'm seeing this type of if you see such power that you're causing induction with induction, you get that multiple resonant frequencies is basically what you're getting. So it's going to just be a huge swath, a big, wide EM band coming from these things, which is what we see. So I can't wait to have them on. Those sunglasses are in my pocket on my jacket right over there.
He's looking very like Invisible Man-ish.
Oh, you should see his black eye underneath that.
Oh, was this, okay.
Buddy and Heather were there when he hit the floor. We were sitting there. We were all talking, and it was just getting paler and paler.
It's actually a cool look.
I was holding him. I mean, literally, single-handedly trying to hold up all of his weight, and he collapsed out of my hands.
It's my fault. I still blame myself for that because I turned.
Such a bad influence.
Well, I was trying to hold him up with my other arm, and I turned for a split second to just say, I said to Heather, grab some towels or some water or something. That's basically what I said. Something along those lines.
This is the night before?
This night before this, yeah. And anyway, then I didn't hold him with my full strength with one of my arms, and he collapsed, and he hit his head on the side of his head, hit the side of the table or a chair on the way down, and his eyebrow smacked straight into the concrete, like onto the floor.
Yeah,
and
you're gonna include this in the episode, aren't you?
Oh yeah, definitely. We're gonna explain this whole thing so that he knows. Everyone knows why he's wearing glasses.
He'll be sure to come on next time.
He wrote he wrote a nice article about it. And included it
did he? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's totally fine with it.
Yeah, he did too.
It's his turn. I mean, I did the one before. I'm the one.
Got it.
He found me collapsed in the bathroom for because I had heat stroke and I don't understand. I didn't understand heat, but he's from Tucson. No excuses for him.
Yeah.
He's seeing this. He's showing these footprints when he's noticing the big butterfly loops and other things like that. And I love the way that he's describing it because he's putting it in a way that people can see patterns, which
definitely looks like a heart.
Yeah, it does actually.
Like the organ, not the shape. You know?
Yes.
Pretty wild.
So I do.
Robert Hawthorne, the senior, called me last week, and he was talking about a fossilized, really super large fossilized reptile, like in the mile range of size in Africa.
What?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to probably chase that. That was about all I got. But
actually, I had this is not the first time I've heard of something like that. Somebody was talked and said the heel stone of Stonehenge is in actuality a foot. It's a giant's foot. And he's looking at it, and so see this mark? This is the capillary going into the rock. And then he's going in, and after he's done showing that it is indeed a foot, he goes and shows other things, shows this is a heart, this is a lung. And he's showing rocks, but they do kind of look like organs.
Right.
And I was wondering, and of course he's going right into fine detail. Now, of course, because we know the electric nature of rocks, the filamentary pattern of veins could be, transposed, and there could be, you're looking at something that's not real. You're not a biologist, whatever. I don't really know the truth, but I found it very fascinating because we've talked about this on more than one occasion. Why do we sometimes find parts of dinosaurs? Like, what causes smaller animals to be fossilized altogether instantly? And in other situations, they're seemingly blown to pieces. Like, you find, a scattering of dinosaur bones. here's a vertebrae. And I'm like, how can you tell that's a vertebrae? And he goes, well, see here, you can see the the cellular structure inside. So this is probably a dinosaur vertebrae. And I was like, what? I thought that dinosaurs came in an area, not interdispersed over the entire state of Utah, So finding that out was, realizing that maybe in certain situations, the reason we will not even find fossilized remains of a human, for example, that's turned to stone, is that they would be turned to stone, and most of them, it would be very rare for these things to actually be completely encased in stone and fossilized. Usually, if electricity went through you, it would cause all the water and all the gases to explode. So chances are you would explode, and then your individual organs and stuff would be turned to stone. You know what I mean? And I thought that was an interesting concept. Something I didn't really think about when I first thought about electric fossilization. But the giant thing was just an added twist, I guess, since we were talking about it the other day. But still, it's interesting to think, because we could be literally looking at all the stone, all these things, and we could be not realizing, yeah, this is parts of animals who have already been blown to pieces and turned to stone, and we're walking across a lot of them.
Well, if you look at chalk's composed of beautiful, tiny little single-celled organisms.
Yeah.
And they're gorgeous, like the up-close view of it, and everything's almost like that. If you look at sand is just composed of, along the majority of all beaches, beautiful, intricate little detailed shells, and it's just crazy how it exists on all scales.
Yeah, you're not wrong. There's this makes me question a lot of things, maybe that a lot of this stuff is organic, and where does a lot of this stuff come from? But
where does organic stop? Ultimately.
Well, when it's turned to stone, I think.
Well, then you could argue that stone is another form of an organic thing.
I've heard people argue that it grows
in a different time frame.
Yeah.
There was somebody online that I think me and Buddy were talking about, or in a post or something, and it was he's talking about stone having grown out of things. And of course, I was wondering about some of these carvings. Did they carve it while, freshly laid? Did it get laid down?
Tesla considers crystals alive. All crystals are living according to his writings and his beliefs.
I consider crystals alive too.
So
of
those are minerals. That's just a mineral, which is a rock. A type of.
It's breathing and it's pulsating and it has an energetic signature that it's. You know what I mean? It's a little bit more than just dead rock.
That link between, not just fire being alive, electricity being alive. Someone has said that tell me that's not alive, and I almost wanted to reply, that's not alive. But what would be the point? You're allowed to think what you want. It's fine. I mean, there is an idea that could possibly, in a way, there is a way that is kind of like life. Okay, lifelike. But when we're looking at things like crystals, there's besides the ones that we see that grow from water, which now I think about it, I'm wondering how many there really are. But seeing them inside caves and knowing how they got how it likely got drugged through the rock as a crystal vein, and whatever, and how they were probably made, they in a way do sort of hold a resonant frequency based on the energy that went through them. And I was talking to somebody the other day thinking, after Chris Dunn was on, and I was talking to a friend of mine, I was like, I think that the entire Earth was probably just humming with a like that, like the whole Earth all the time. And every single crystal in the entire Earth. Yeah. In argument, there's that hum thing is that, like that what a Tallahassee hum or whatever it's called, or I'm not sure.
Well, it's the Schumann resonance.
Oh yes, that.
And that's so, which is also apparently the frequency of 432, or some say the frequency of love, or, because you can equate, a lot of people equate it to that, because, what does create life? Arguably love. So they gave the vibration the name love, as well. So.
Well, I can
That's that argument that they pulled it up to 440 to keep us from
I don't know enough about that. I mean, I've heard it. Don't get me wrong, but the Schumann resonance is actually 7.82, I think, hertz. So variations of that, like if you were 7.82 and then 14, we couldn't hear that, but we could hear what is it? What's double that? So it's 7.82 to somewhere around 34 hertz would be a really low bass note. So I don't know. I could imagine.
Right.
We just have a limit on how low we can hear. Elephants were like, yeah, we love it here. Could you imagine elephants, if they can actually hear that low into infrasonic, if they can hear 7.82 hertz, they would hear the Earth the whole time, all the time? It'd be weird.
Yeah. Just think about what that, how about that? There's an experiment you could do. Try holding a thought, for 20 minutes. That's kind of the experience of a very slow wave. It's super difficult to do, by the way, because your mind is darting around all the time.
Oh, yes.
And but that would be just thinking about the act of doing it is experiencing ultra low frequency, or what we consider ultra low.
Yeah, I wondered if that ever tuned into the idea of harmony, Buddhism, and stuff like that. Because when I was thinking about, obviously, I really enjoyed the idea of enlightenment. It helped me understand what was and what was not. There's no I in enlightenment, type of thing. You have to really understand the nature, think without words. The idea of nirvana being a thoughtless only experiencing type of mental state, which you can enjoy for about maybe 7 seconds at a time. I found I can't go any much longer than that. Once I start going, oh my God, I've achieved, I've already lost it. That's, you've achieved nirvana and it's done. Because there is a certain, you're trying to basically perceive without bias completely and to recognize things as they are without putting your own thoughts on top of it. And in beautiful areas, you can do that.
But you have a little tyrant running around in your head all the time. So.
Well, listen to this, you guys. This is interesting that I found through my notes. 1/3 of the sensory motor cortex of the brain is devoted to the tongue, oral cavity, the lips, and speech. In other words, oral frequency emissions, spoken or sung, exert powerful control over life, vibrating genes that influence total well-being and even the evolution of the species. Dr. Leonard Horowitz. The degradation of language can degrade biology. That's what I know.
Yeah. As far as I've seen a diagram of this, it's pretty interesting. Just the sensory map as far as the scalar kind of representation of it.
1/3 of the sensory motor cortex. 1/3. So if they tell us, they're always like, you get how much X, 90% of your information from your eyes. Why would 1/3 of your sensory cortex be devoted to oral, the tongue, the oral cavity, the lips, and speech? Your ability to create those vibrations within yourself, within your own physicality.
More than one person has mentioned this to me. In fact, the person who trolled me across Facebook and screamed out a bunch of obscenities to me, the gentleman who I met at EU 2016, he was basically, he was trying to explain how all of language is a spell, it's just magic and people are forced to obey it. And I was like, historically speaking, there is some merit to that in a way. I just mean that there were spells in ancient Egypt, and how much did you really know when people of authority spoke to you? You listened intently, and you had to obey. That's kind of interesting.
Well, and I think it also goes back to if we want to go back to plasma forms in the sky make sounds that are interpreted as letters. and have divinatory meanings. So if we're seeing these things and they're making these sounds and we can make similar sounds, we can put those sounds together to create a simulation of what we saw in the sky to our desired effect. So we can make those same things happen by communicating them between each other or within ourselves by speaking it or singing it into action, singing it into existence.
I think a lot of those rituals might have been like that, exactly. Mm-hmm. Especially when I think of native chanting, exactly, yeah.
And the Om, because the Om is the 7.82 frequency.
It's amazing how many of these letters that we have. Like one time I was looking at just the letters of the alphabet and realizing how many of them were likely plasma forms at the beginning. Obviously O and T, but then A, and then V, of course, being the upside down of that and stuff, and then X and Y. You know, I'm just Z. It's just, I couldn't believe how many after a while are either like basically those sprites. They look like sprites that you could see in the sky, which I think they might have been, depending. Okay. And you could see them changing and moving and morphing, which makes me think about ancient Hebrew, where they said, no, the words were spoken in the sky, and we just copied them, you know?
Right.
And I was like, damn.
There's arguments that's actually, you know, flame formations that they saw the entire
actually
alphabet.
Probably the same. It's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, it's the same stuff, really, at the end of the day, right? It moves kind of similarly, just slower if it's larger.
Yep. Right.
Which would be easier to write it down. You know, it's hard to.
Well, yeah, but, you know, I've taken. I mean, I think I've showed you guys these before, but the pictures of the sprites, taken by the guy who takes them in Oklahoma, Paul Smith, and ran them through filters and found Hebrew letters. I found runes in these images, you know, and right now there's a bunch of angel sprites coming out, and then Robert posted a picture from Russia, out of Russia, that had an elf with it.
Yep, I saw it.
Yeah, and it's like
a big blue disc.
Yeah. It's the more we examine these things and we look at it, and to be completely honest, last late winter, spring, maybe it was late January, so winter time, but there was some sprites coming out, and I was doing this filtering through them, and I was seeing runes, and
it was like runes, Norse runes,
and it was amazing because some of the runes that came out, it was Isa and Helga's. I have a really hard time pronouncing them, but one is the standstill rune, and one of it is disruption, hail. It's the hailstone. So I think I even posted it. I was like, man, if I was an ancient and I looked at this, I would think that our protective layer is going to be up and over for a while. There's a standstill in our protection, and the disruption is. And ever since then, there has been an uptick in not only sprites and aggressive sprites, but the earthquakes, the volcanoes, all kinds of things. And it had to do with Jupiter's position moving when this occurred, you know. And then I was also talking at that time about a comet, I think it's 67P, that has its greatest elongation of aphelion around one of the Jupiter's moons. Whenever it does aphelion and it hits near Europa, it goes off. And we have space weather effects such as these. And then there's also some mythology associated with that, where there's like this one mistress that comes in and is defeated or aggravates this other mistress at this specific time. I'd have to look that up to give you more details, but I did talk to Julian a little bit about that, because I was like, why is this happening, and what correlates with this that we can maybe derive from ancients to understand better. Like, maybe they understood all of these bodies have names and they all behave like this, and so they made the stories correlate with the behaviors that they were, so Jupiter got pissed that these two were fighting, and Earth has, you know what I mean, and creates a storm, and Earth suffers, and volcanoes go off and things like this happen. And it's I'd have to look back at my notes about 67P and about this happening, but I do have it all written down somewhere. But just those types of things. Like, could a comet at another planet be affecting the sun, which in turn would affect us? in that sense. And then, and then we're seeing it in the skylights. And then that's, so if I was an ancient and I was reading that warning when those came out, when the sprites started happening like this, and then since then all of these things have happened, I mean, yeah, I would be like, this is what's going on.
Well, if you could go back just a second there, one page,
Sure.
to the Paul things with the pictures. I mean, I was looking at that sprite right there.
Mm-hmm.
How can you not? Like, if you saw those sustained in the sky, I don't mean just there for a flash, because that's what they're only there for a split, because they're so large and they're transferring energy so quickly across such a large area. But if they were sustained for any length of time and you saw this, I mean, am I mistaken? Does that not appear to be like, things like Valkyries and stuff like that, or
angels? Looks like angels.
Absolutely, they're angel sprites. That's what they're called, angel sprites.
I mean,
jellyfish, lightning sprite,
jellyfish.
Yeah.
Sprites, other places.
I'm reminded of a gentleman. Not sure who it was. I don't know if it was. They were talking about going across. They were traversing the Northwest Passage, trying to get to the Orient across the northern part of Canada, because obviously going down all the way around the South Pole, down towards the South Pole and then back up was a pain in the butt. So they figured they could cut off some time if they could figure their way across that. Anyway, he was up there and he was looking at the Northern Lights, and he said, "It is impossible for me to reconcile. If ancient man saw this, how could they not believe in the divine? How could you look up at the sky and not believe? You know what I mean? And that seeing is believing thing, that's the part I think that we've really lost. Obviously, I mean, the whole, invisible God in the sky to the point
that
where
there
we
was
hit
something beyond it. I mean, this is the one that I find the big limitation with the mainstream is that, everything's empirical, and then it's like, what's the why? The why comes in often, and then what is the action? I understand the empirical part of it too, but okay, why this formation? Why this shape? Why?
I thought you were going to go in a whole different direction there. I thought you were not going with shapes. I thought you were going to go with control. And I was like, Rick and Morty had a whole show on this.
But why is always the one that they, this is they'll disparage that one question.
These kind of look like, if you really give a good look at them, the main section of them look like bulls with horns, and then like flames coming out the top of their heads.
Yeah,
you see there.
I do, like longhorned steers.
I did message this guy before about coming to talk to us, and he said that
really?
It was during his busy season, and to get back with him. So, maybe featuring some of his work on our show he may be interested and come talk to us.
Yeah, Paul Smith.
Come on, Paul Smith.
Come on, Paul.
We love you. Tell us what you see. How do you get these pictures? Because I know they're like long exposures, and he, sets out, and he's amazing. Just all kinds of sky photography, lightning, these things, beautiful, beautiful nature work. So, I was just like really interested in his take on it, and I did send him some EU information about what he was seeing. So, from our perspective. So, and he was very friendly. If anybody else might want to reach out to him or something, that would be
I'm often now, I mean, just seeing the way that the world works now is just so much more alive. I mean, compared to what I used to think,
Yeah. You start seeing it as a living thing, and then the reflection of it.
Well, and then everything else too, because if you're just looking at something as like this isolated sphere floating around in outer space all by its lonely, lonesome self, it gives you some sort of like overt self-importance or something, like nothing else exists except us. But then when you realize that it's this living, breathing being in the middle of, this huge other thing, and everything affects everything else, and the ripples and the waves just kind of run into each other and hit, and they go from way far out beyond what we could ever even imagine, and they're right here deep, deep little inside us. And then all of a sudden, everything becomes really important because you realize the butterfly effect of something that's happening light years away.
Right.
I think
that how the experience mirrors, the world, etc. That breakdown between this our res extensa and res cognizant to get all esoteric or erudite with Descartes. But that's been the strong barrier. It's always they. You got to blame someone.
Yes.
So they blame they as usual. Yeah.
Big T.
They with a capital I.
Those theys.
Those people. But one of the things I saw recently, we were talking about this, and it had to do with somewhat. They noticed, like for example, a spaceship, satellite, for lack of a better term, I guess, a mission to Mars or something, was flying along, and they have to use the sun to orientate it because they lost one of their thrusters. So because they only have 2 thrusters left, and they were talking about why these thrusters were failing, which led to this interesting talk about the sun. And of course, if you have they use the light of the sun to to cause pressure to the craft on one side more than the other, so it would slowly roll, and then they could adjust it using pretending that was another very weak thruster to orientate the craft. I thought that was brilliant. The way that they solved their problems, miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and miles away. But what they did is they noticed that a CME washed over the spacecraft, and in so doing caused a bunch of shorts because electrical arcing through blew one of the insulating boots off of one of these thrusters, so it no longer worked anymore. It was grounded out, so it could no longer turn on. And I mentioned it before, when the first satellite we sent up after Sputnik was to go and take pictures of the Earth, and they did. They sent them all back to Earth when it landed. Actually, they didn't broadcast. They actually landed the craft and recovered the photos. But all the photos had lightning bolts across them, like giant sparks and scrapes and everything else, because it was an uninsulated aircraft, and they had moving metal parts in it. So these moving metal parts were rubbing against each other, and as such, they sparked and everything else because they were in space. Very, very, let's just say, bone dry environment, they thought. But it's more than that, obviously. It's filled with plasma. So here we are years later, and they're still having issues. And we wonder now, they're going back and examining how many other spacecraft have got hit with CMEs as they traveled to, say, Mars, for example. And did that have to do with, because another orbiter went over the part where they looked down and saw where the other orbiter had landed, and how you could see these white pieces here. Those are parts of the orbiter that landed, because it blew apart. It hit so hard, and it just blew to pieces. You can see a black mark. But someone said very intelligently, "Why is there a black mark around it? There's no air to create an explosion. There was no explosion." You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But the black mark is the same type of black marks we see at the bottom of those tornadoes, those giant 5-mile dust devils that go across Mars. They leave black streaks across the ground, because they're somehow chemically changing the rock or dirt as they roll across it. And so they noticed that around that particular crash site, which would indicate then that it had discharged to the ground prior or during its fall. So perhaps that's why it was blown to pieces, and the pieces were spread out around it, because basically it went down and got zapped and, pow, and exploded as it came in. So this is just a whole brand new way of looking at things, and we don't deal with it. We're just now realizing, just now, what is it, 2018? We sent up that first satellite in the 50s, and the first time it was a big warning, hey, you should have clued in then. And they made the space shuttle and said, yeah, we can't have no metal on the outside of the space shuttle. It has to be 100%, covered in cinder blocks, touching each other. No air can get through, nothing. And that's what, keeps that thing safe. Well, they thought it was for heat, but it's not for heat. It's for the insulation that you're going, you have to isolate yourself where you're going to be, electricity will find a way to ruin your day. I just think about stuff like that, like why, what are we going to learn now in this whole connected system that we're now in? And especially now that we're sending a satellite to the sun, or 3 million miles away. Can imagine how fun that's going to be when it gets hit with one. Hope it's well insulated.
Yeah. There is Billy Elverton.
Yep.
Billy Elverton shared one of Jacob Gable's videos on Facebook.
Oh, really? Oh, cool. All right.
High five, Jacob.
I love this. We should probably...
Dude,
Go ahead.
His videos keep getting better and better. Like, he's got some new ones out.
Montage.
And they're amazing. And I forget what else he put in there. I think it was a chunk of copper or something in the mix, and it got really hot and started glowing. And he's getting better at.
Yes, and he said he did that because of our conversation that we had with him.
Yeah, and he's getting better at creating the plasma tornadoes.
Mm-hmm. And this little nebula.
Oh
Really?
my gosh!
Wow,
it's sweet. Yeah.
Really?
should have him back on. I missed that one. Fortunately.
That was the double
Yeah,
day.
Right.
But it's okay. I'm sure he'll come back on and we can talk to him more about it because he's come. He's been like what he's saying. He's been doing some even more now since then.
Yeah.
The busy bee.
Right. Nice.
He contacted me and said, or asked for an Electric View T-shirt.
Okay.
I was like, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good job.
So, yeah.
You do it with a
I'm like-
skeleton?
You can make his when you make mine.
I know I haven't made any more than that one day. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have so much going on today. Yeah, I'm doing painting and replacing windows and just all sorts of crazy things.
Fall is
I'm
coming.
doing that. The
Right,
Hawthorns are going to be in Denver or something. There's a big geology show they're going to.
Yeah.
That would be interesting to
I'm looking forward
check
to that.
out. Are you going to that?
No. I just looking forward to hearing the contacts they made, just like when Ito went and talked to the people at the well, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say cold fusion. Because I remember that's what it's about, but we can't really talk about that. But
look at the symmetry here. The symmetry in this thing.
I think those.
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
You can see him, right?
Well, I think we talk. The ancients talked about that, the dual symmetry on either side of the polar column. How there's two snakes on one snake on either side. It sort of reminds me of those weird lions that look really strange on either side of the coat of arms. You know what I mean? Like those type of weird, funky snake-like lions that are kind of sort of sitting there around the coat of arms. But what I really like about these sprites is how fast they are. This is amazing. Look, is this real? This?
I think so. It looks it.
Because I remember you showed earlier how fast they were. Because this obviously must be very much slowed down. Because the one that you showed earlier, how it would just appeared and disappeared like that. But what I realized, and it's hard to, because of the distance and you're not really unsure what you're looking at, that's jumping from the top of those clouds, which is like 15 miles up tops, all the way to space at about 40 kilometers, and it spanned that distance like that, and it was over.
Yeah.
That's
But see,
all the energy.
See this one here?
Was transferred that quickly.
Watch this one. There's this. I'm it's just playing around with these hypocycloids. It's like you see this thing. Watch here. You see that right there? See how it's all throughout that, and you kind of see script writing too. But
those are induced currents right there. Those little tiny balls going around. Those plasmas.
Right.
But
I know
see how fast they're in existence,
etc. But
like that.
But it's like, but right there, you see this stuff. Man.
It reminds me of a particle collider because they're moving. It seems like they're moving in opposite directions. Part of it's going up and part of it's going down.
Definitely.
Well, it is. Actually, that's very true. If you have anything, especially moving that quickly, like a bunch of charges moving in one direction quickly, it's going to induce currents going in the exact opposite direction right beside itself. And in fact, that probably happens inside lightning bolts and everything else, but we just, because of their speed and stuff, we don't see it very often, and because of the thickness of the atmosphere, obviously. But up there, it's just basically, it's like a wire making fire move. You ever tried that? Sticking a wire into a fire and then playing like a music through it and then watching the fire dance because of all the vibrations going through the wire, electrical vibrations.
Oh, we'll have to do that on video. You'll have to do that for us because I really want to see that. I don't think I've ever tried that. But these things definitely have a figurative quality about them, and like an animated figurative quality. So I could see why they might think that there's beings in the sky or dragons. Especially if they were.
Well, this is where you start to see
and more sustained.
Right.
Well, what area has the largest amount of folklore about that? And if you look at Taiwan, they built holes in their buildings on the coast. The buildings on the coast of Taiwan, I believe it's Taiwan.
It's Hong Kong. I know what you're talking about.
They have holes in the sides of their buildings. So that the dragons can roll through and still get through and out through those valleys and things like that. And if David or whoever's controlling, if you could kindly or please check this out, they literally build all their buildings based around it.
Yeah, it's Feng Shui. Yeah, I love that they held on to that, because if it wasn't for the modern stuff notwithstanding, you can say interpretation, telephone game there. But if you go all the way back to and I've found some online, like old books on Feng Shui. Look up Hong Kong skyline. That's what he's talking about.
Okay. Hong Kong skyline.
Hong Kong, yeah. But anyway, the Feng Shui book I read, it was just filled with just the part on where to bury someone. Just if someone died, where you buried them. Okay. That alone was like an entire chapter discussing the motions of currents through the air and where the dragons are going and where you have to build, because dragons go here, they don't go here, they go through this kind of rock, not that kind of rock, those type of things. It was very, very detailed, and I cannot blame them for not carrying it along. Let's try to find a skyline with holes in it. There's holes in the buildings, basically. I'm not trying to... plasma. Look at how beautiful it is. Wouldn't you love that? I want to go there. No, I've never been to a city that big. Look how beautiful it is. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've been to New York, so,
Yeah. I have no idea what.
Put it holes, or Feng Shui. Holes? Feng Shui. Put in FENG S. Yeah, that's it. They found it for us. Thank you.
Oh, here?
Dragon holes? Yeah, there they are. See?
Dragon proof. Yeah.
Yeah. They have to make the holes so the dragons can go through them.
Okay.
But
that just shows how adamant they are about how important it is to them and their culture and their realities and their mindset, their Weltschmerz, their zeitgeist. But Yeah. That's
Yeah,
pretty
that
cool.
one right there is actually amazing. That one, if you go up slightly to, not that one, just over to the left. That one over to the left. That one. If you look at the top of that skyscraper there, you notice how it has a gun on it. That's a crane up there at the top. That's not a building. Yeah, that crane at the very top of the middle building there. You can see it just at the top. That crane. See it? Little tiny crane.
There?
No, not that one. The building right in front of us.
Right here.
That one. The crane. That's not. That crane's a permanent fixture. It's not an actual pretend fixture. And the reason it's permanent is because there's two of them. There's another one on the other side, and they're mounted like guns pointed towards that ugly-looking building that's all triangly over to the side, because that building has been dominated. Has been said to be an evil building by all the Feng Shui people because they didn't obey the rules of Feng Shui. So the other buildings that do have to protect themselves against that building. So this is how this guy is protecting his building by weaponizing it against that building. That's how much they believe in
it's like a
stuff.
cannon. Huh?
Yes, that's what he basically put him up there. Yes, to show the gods or show the dragons that he's not with him.
I wonder how many buildings out there are sporting the Trump name on them.
I really don't know.
Trump pimps out just his name, not just so people can put it on their buildings, and he gets paid to use his name, and even though they have nothing to do with Trump.
That's weird. I mean, a lot of people put names on their buildings. I'm not,
I know.
I can't judge too harshly.
It's like, hey, I got a trademark, but you can use it here. Just pay me forever.
See, they've circled them up there. See if you go up a little higher there, I want to look at it. See how they circled it right there? See those two things? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. See? They mounted them like guns, like
they're like laser blasters.
Yep, exactly. I'm going to shoot you with my fictional power, and you're going to believe it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love.
Well, see, that's intention, right?
Yeah,
that's certainly that's intention in action.
Yes, I love it. But did you see something about Feng Shui in Disneyland?
Oh, it's there, but in Hong Kong it was fun.
Oh, they have Hong Kong Disneyland? Oh, I don't know anything apparently. Makes me want to go more now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I like to go. I want to go to lots of places around the world. Just to visit. I'll bring lots of friends to get me out of trouble.
Oh yeah, okay. I've heard of people documenting their acid trips when they go to Disneyland.
Why?
That was a thing in Florida to do that. I personally never did it, but
no, but
not that I wouldn't do it, but it's like that.
Well, it seems a private experience to me. I don't know.
No, I know it would be the last place I would want to do it, but there was a thing about doing it. So.
The whole idea of I try very hard not to be drunk in public, let alone anything else. unless we're just wandering around the hotel, I guess. With my friends, and then we go sit in a car and listen to music in the middle of the night after our friend Andy is taken care of because he was so beat up, and we're like we stayed in the room for and talked around him for an hour and a half because we wanted to make sure he didn't actually have a concussion because we just kept talking.
It was like trouble with my system.
Yeah, you're losing your memory size is. You have a memory leak.
Yeah,
you have to shut something down.
Yeah, it's probably is running something on it. Man, so if I go away suddenly, you'll know why.
Just like that.
Wait, hopefully, yeah.
I thought you did. I thought you just cut off there for a sec. So
you can still hear me, right?
Oh yeah. What is flashback? A program you're using?
That's the recording software.
Oh, okay.
So,
that makes
speaking
sense.
About acid trips. Let's go. Yeah, Manly P. Hall. Just to ring Heather's ancestors and lineage there.
I would love to have a talk about that one time, like us getting together and basically getting someone who's into some sort of aspect of hermetism or occultishness in a way that's, that we could have on, not necessarily because it is for me as much as it would be to see what we can glean from it, like the little nuggets, but obviously.
It's really interesting. It's certainly a sudden fascination with a lot of that stuff.
Well, there's something to it. I always found it to be, a lot of the stuff like alchemy and stuff, as we talked before, or spoke before, was something akin to the science of the day.
Right.
We dragging ourselves into the Renaissance, but we only did that with the benefit of what they did in ancient Greece once we finally got their translations. And my thoughts.
Well, it's an interesting upside down thing. I was sharing this, but it's the idea, like the whole way that we portray alchemy in like modern culture is that they were just they were attempting because of their evilness to turn the base metals into gold, and that's what it was all about. And they were just like, and they were trying to use mystical spells, and and that's how they painted, right? And it was just insane. But if you look at it, you start looking at the literature, it's actually the opposite, right? Because we in our culture, all the work is all about creating some materials thing that you get, like a fortune or fame or a pat on the head from. But it's the end result that's always what counts. Right.
Right.
That answer in school. Did you do it right in school? Right. It's like, here's your test. Did you do it right? And it's like, this is ultimately the end result is all that matters. Right. And it's the opposite. If you look at the literature about alchemy, it's about the process. It's the study of the process of creating something, not the end result. So it's actually an upside down picture, and I would argue highly hypocritical,
I would agree.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
I agree.
You're in fact, if I just to extend what I was saying and to agree with you in there, one of the things I noticed about it was that basically we were at a point where we were fairly intelligent and advanced around the Mediterranean and that environment, probably all the way to China. From China to there, basically all across that middle area, right across India, right across to China. So all those were seemingly, I think, fairly advanced. Now, the question becomes, how did we lose it all? And then it was gone. It was like Europeans, at least, especially. I mean, not in the Byzantine area. The Byzantines all the way over to Andalusia in Spain, Andalusia. The Moorish territories all across North Africa lasted longer because before they were quote unquote conquered. But that conquering, and then the purging of knowledge, and then the attempt to rebuild knowledge again. That's what I saw in alchemy and hermeticism, was trying to make a sense of the world through the guise or through what they were taught through, so what they could glean from the ashes of Rome. When they were finally allowed to step up and go, okay, now because this is why they were hiding themselves all the time. Like they had to be, they couldn't reveal themselves that they were intelligent people studying nature. That would be a dangerous thing to say.
I might say that goes further back than Rome, though. I might say that the Hermetics comes from Greece, which comes from Egypt, during like Alexandria and beyond. Then I think it like comes back further than that, and maybe the Roman is the reason that it's suppressed.
You're not wrong. I mean, Hermes, Hermeticism, I understand. Like we're in that area. But what I'm thinking though, is that we didn't have access to that knowledge. We just knew of the knowledge, and they were trying to reinvent it. The knowledge itself, however, was still held in texts and scrolls and everything else. When we finally got our hands on those, we realized that ancient Greece, that's when we started calling things sciences again. Like, because they were disciplines, they were sciences, optics, architecture, stuff like that. They were well versed, and they knew mechanics. Like, this is comparatively, they were, compared to, say, what they knew in the Middle Ages, they didn't have access to that knowledge. It wasn't translated yet into a language they could speak, even if they found it. So, and they, these cultures didn't talk. I mean, just to be honest, they were doing the Crusades and stuff. It wasn't something we're going to get into. So I'm thinking that in what these people were trying their best with what they had to reinvent science that the Greeks had. And because of this whole...
But in the process, they did a lot of cutting, because if you look at, like, Pythagoras, obviously, that's our most documented one. There was such a focus on exactly what's kind of bubbling up right now. It's the play of symmetry and harmonics, and how this relates to a certain type of state of consciousness as you look at it. But it's a mixture of the sonic, what's our perception of a scale? There's, along with the different, 12 notes broken up into 7 notes. There's, I think there's 12 ultimately, but different modes that you can pull out of that.
Right.
And they each have different spirits to them, But you're ringing, a string.
Well, yeah, and it's coming back.
The combination of these strings. And it's like, this is all about what it was about. It was about the perception of the spirit of that. This part got totally cut out, but also it's kept obscured. It's like, it seems to me, you can see throughout, like, the power of sound in culture. We're just talking about 432, and they moved it to 440, and then all these other things. It's like, why is this kind of kept under lock and key and highly guarded? This is a, once again, I like my uncomfortable question, inconvenient question is why.
Why is what exactly?
Why do they keep? Why have they kept this? They kept it off the table. Once again, electrical engineering. Why are harmonics studied as whole numbers versus, like, the in between the octave, where ultimately is where it happens from my standpoint?
Well, I think you're going. Well, I can't answer that exactly, that particular thing, because like you said,
well, this is like what we're seeing with the sprites and these symmetries and the formation of these solids. It's right in there. And it's not really that far to show it, like, really solidly.
You're. I think we're on the same ballpark. I think what I'm seeing is, obviously, here's where I'm going to play you in this case. You're going to ask wondrously about, just like you did, and I'm going to imply a conspiracy where I'm going to say control. The answer is control.
Right.
Right. Because, let's face it. Great art and other things like that. There's a secret language that is spoken between people. I don't understand it, but I've been on this earth long enough to recognize when things like the Hermeticism and alchemy and occult they wouldn't obviously be those 3 words if they weren't somehow mysterious. There's this air of mystery. They're called the mystery schools. And in a way, they could teach you connections between things. Like, I've listened to Heather and other people who are just into astrology, and in that alone, that very base touch of the deeper meaning of, so to speak, it itself is just is such a myriad of surfaces to touch on, and symbols, and all of these symbols relate to thoughts and reach back into something that could only be decoded by those people who are versed in that. Now, we're in a way we're sort of walking through that garden, tromping through it. Actually, is what we're doing. We're just like look at that picture right the one on your screen, the one with the guy peeking out through the dome of the heavens. It's that one exactly. Now, this says so much, but notice how there's rings to the planets, the rings of the Earth, and he's sticking his head out to the dome. This is sort of a picture of the world that you have to see from the Earth-centric point of view. And it wasn't until much later that we saw that way. So their point of view that they're looking at is not the point of view that a lot of us are looking at. And like I said, we're tramping through the garden in a big way where we're not paying attention. Like here we are, it's going, these things in the sky look like runes. And I bet you if we went to some guy in who studies this stuff, he would go, yeah, it's in this book here. You guys are so stupid. Like, of course it is. They were talking about this. Here it is. He says right here, this is taken from stuff we saw in the sky, or whatever. But there's the breadth of information that they're able to, they leak through. Like, for example, the rings. The idea the planet has rings has never been talked about, but there it is in an etching from the 1500s that sort of implies it. How did that knowledge get here? How did it pass through? And this same thing reaches all the way back through time, and a lot of this knowledge had to be hidden from people who were obviously going to come after them. And given the thought control was a big thing at we'll call it the Dark Ages, for lack of a better term, before the Renaissance, everyone up until that point. Even then, let's not even pretend, even till now, even. But the freedom and looseness to think was simply not there. Your life, you're taking your life into your own hands. So there certainly is an air to disguising your knowledge into something else. And not just for safety, but
you said a lot about a lot of things, but
you go ahead. The
whole
now.
Idea of it's okay. I don't even where to start. 10 and the 12, the 10 and the 12, and the standard, like, why use 10 as a base, base
we
10
talked about
instead
that,
of 12 and all of that. But it also comes down to, right, because 10 is the solidity of the material. That's the finite of the material. That's where the material stops. So if you stop at 10, you are trapped in the material. If you do the 11 and the 12, you're going into your subconscious, you're dying, you're doing the rebirth, you're looking at the death and what comes after that, and then you can go to the rebirth, which is what they're prohibiting you from doing when they're stopping you at the material 10. And that's what he's doing when he's looking through from the material plane onto the next plane into space. And he can see the wheel in the sky. And it isn't necessarily about it being Earth-centric as much as it is about how all of these things are interconnected, and they're kind of like gears. And all of the gears push and twist and turn and affect how the next cog is turning and which tooth it's grabbing at that moment in its spin, in its motion to churn its job. And that's what he's looking at, and that's what that wheel is about as he's staring through it. And I think a lot of it has to do with base 10 and keeping us trapped in the material and keeping us the isolated body floating around, isolated rock floating around in space. And have it not be connected, because by connecting to the 11 and by connecting to the 12, by seeing the subconscious, by reaching and seeing that there is something else than the 11, the 11 and the 12, the master numbers. They're when we've taken everything in the material plane and we're able to process it mentally first, spiritually second, allow that death to come so that you can be reborn into the next material plane thing that you will be with that knowledge you've brought with you. And we can't experience those things if we aren't allowed to see the 11 and the 12. And that's what the Hermeticism is doing, and what those numbers are doing. They're allowing us to walk through this plane of existence into another plane that is very real and very much does exist. and seeing what the fruits of those things are to allow that full cycle completion. We have base 12 when we talk about our numbers and when we talk about time, because we cannot eliminate them from that. The universe won't allow it. It's important that they're there. Pi is there. That's what it is.
Right.
You know? And we can see that that's what it is, but it doesn't break down into base 10. It will not break down into base 10 because base 10 does not include all the planes.
But our perception is that, I mean, this is where the material versus the, you know, transcendental or transcendent comes in. Well, but the material is, this is like the morphic resonance, just to get into what Sheldrake's talking about.
But here,
this is what five plays on. Just 1 second.
I know.
The five plays in such a big role, I think. And the phi, you know, you look at what Merrick's talking about, it's like, this is where you get the most, the highest level of interference. That's why they design these large concert halls with the proportion of 5, because you get the most. That's the absorption part, and we're actually, by being in the physical world, you know, this symmetry and manifestation of ultimately what seems like light in a coherent form in matter is based on the 5. And then when you go to the 12, I think it ends up, that's where you get transcendent. So I'm in agreement with you, Heather.
Okay, thanks. Because the 5 is the conflict and the freedom and the challenge. And so when we get to that V, when we get to the apex or that point part of that V, it's when all of that has come to full, like, okay, now that, you know, something has to change, and it's inverted, and then it comes out the other side, and it makes the whole funnel. You know what I mean? It makes the X, the 10, both sides of the 5, and where they converge in the center is, like I said, it's the chaos point, it's the conflict, it's the challenge to overcome. When you come out the other side of it, for 6, now you have choices. There's choices to be made, right? And but the 4 preceding it is kind of the stability and holding on to the stability. So if you make the choice to move on to 5, to progress from 4 to 5, then you're inviting the conflict to give you the choice of the next thing to do, right? And so that's how the progression of numbers works energetically, and they're all represented in this way. See, there's the 5 and the 5 in there together. And they create the 10, and the Degas is the transformation, the breakthrough.
Right. Well, I'm sorry, if I may. I don't want to lose this thought. With regards to what you were saying, the whole thing, everything in this conversation that you spoke on, Heather, and even what Dave was speaking about, kind of, does that not to you feel very much like it is wrapped, or is at least born from the Christian mindset? And the reason I say that is because I just mean in general, not that, I mean, you know, not specific like this, but it comes from, because I think about the Romans and how they wrote and how they spoke, which we luckily have some examples of, and the ancient Greeks, and not saying that their world wasn't as complex as they made it, because obviously it was, but the things that they were talking about and the things that they were discussing was completely different than this very beautifully esoteric thing that seems to be born from the basically picking up the books from the ashes of this old culture and all these ruins, and then, of course, building monasteries and secluding yourself away, and then having these archived as knowledge and then taken out as books for other people to transcribe and to read and to write anthologies about. And then it seems to be born from trying to interpret the world from that point of view forward. From the people there.
I don't get what you're talking about as far as. Well, I think we're going back before Christianity.
No, I'm not arguing that you're right. No. I'm not saying that it doesn't start there, because obviously Pythagoras and the pentagram and everything like that, showing the golden ratio, all of that stuff, yes, all of that stuff certainly has aspects that we're talking about, and obviously they reached into this is why they went to Egypt in the first place, to learn from these mystery schools. This is probably where it came from. I'm not denying that.
Before then,
it could be exactly. I'm not trying to bash the accumulation of knowledge and where 12 comes from. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the trappings that were put along it, like when that basically the monastic view of the world and the etherealness of the transcendence of going to heaven and all this other stuff that they were talking about.
But 12 is a priori. It's a priori. Empirical, actually.
Yeah, but I'm not denying it.
You can see it. Yeah,
I'm not trying to deny it. I'm not trying to deny any of that. All I was saying was the trappings that it was put onto it, and the modern, what we consider occult now. I'm using air quotes when I say it. Are coming from that sort of idea that gives it. Because let's face it, those guys controlled the world's thought, or at least Europe's thought, and the way that they were able to do that would be something "quote unquote" worth imitating.
Okay, so
in that sense, the mystery, and stuff like that. But there's obviously clearly they're taking their symbols, and some of the stories seem to be additions to some of the stuff that seems to be from even older. Is what I'm saying. There's definitely something in there.
Let me just tell you where it looks like from where I'm standing.
Yes, please, because you're more versed than I am.
From where I'm standing. And I could take a walk later and see it a different way, okay? But from this perspective, these things were here these things were borrowed tradition that go way, way back to the Sumerians and maybe beyond that. Definitely Zoroastrian expounded a lot of these things and brought them into the beliefs, into the understanding. What we can take from it is to say that maybe Christianity was built on a certain understanding of what works for what means. Okay. And then making that the story. Because I've often thought, like, when we're developing as humans and we're taught something, and they always say, get them as children, make sure you teach. Oh, sorry. Is that me?
I don't know.
Okay, sorry. But when they teach the children is during like those developmental pathways are being built within their brains. And so when we teach children certain stories as they're growing up, we're kind of teaching their mind to be built in a certain way. We're directing the pathways to be built within the next generation. Okay, so when we teach them from specific books, when we teach them certain languages, when we teach them certain activities and ways of going through things, we're building their brain structure for how they will understand and process as adults. And once that's happened, it's much harder to reprogram an adult than it is to just pre-program a child. So they understood that these particular elements were effective for these particular means. They might configure a manual for such building of minds, for such building of people. Okay,
I like this pre-programming concept.
Well, it's a thought, because when we're born and we're constantly taught the I Ching, we become a certain kind of person. Yeah. When we're born and we're constantly taught the Bible, we become another type of person. Where the way that we view what we're seeing was taught to us through this lens. Mm-hmm. When we're born without any of those and we're just taught societally, then that's the lens that we see through. Right. So I think that there were certain elements.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Is very big in this, right? And actually, so if you think Moses was Egyptian, Moses was raised Egyptian, and Horus had 12 principles that he lived by, which just so happened to be the same as the 10 Commandments. Okay, but instead of saying, "I will live this way," "I will not kill," "I will not steal," "I will not," all of the rest of them, it was changed to "Thou shalt not." And that was the instruction Moses gave his people to live by. These commandments that he had actually been raised with in the Egyptian faith. And that is the primary rule book for monotheistic religion.
You just implied a conspiracy of monumental proportions. He went up with his three guys and didn't talk to God. He just wrote them down, chopped them into pieces, and said, my father used to say these really cool things. Maybe this will set them straight. What do you think? Good idea.
Well, originally he came out with a lot more commandments, and nobody could follow them, and they were broken into pieces. And
I watched that in History of the World Part 1.
Yeah, and then he went back up and had an encounter with a tree, as most mystics do, and then had 10. So, and either way, either one of them, people couldn't obey it, and they were having a hard time. So, it just goes to show the type of people that they were, and how hard it was to resist these compulsions at the beginning.
Well, we were also talking about that too, about how it was a change of age, where it was going from the age of Taurus into the age of Aries.
That's correct.
And that the majority of the symbolic god symbols were bulls and calves, and the golden calf, and Hathor, my favorite, and all of these different bull type cow oriented deities that were responsible for life and happiness and prosperity and abundance and all of these wonderful things people love. And when that was done, then we had the age of Aries. And when the age of Aries came in, that's when the blood of the lamb and all that other stuff started happening with the sheep.
Who's writing?
And then, and then when the age of Aries was done, we got in the age of Pisces, which is Jesus and his fish. And then now we're headed to the age of Aquarius. But that particular moment in history when Moses came down and said, these are the new rules and this is what we're doing now, he was demanding a change of guard, I guess, from Taurus into Aries. We will sacrifice the lamb now.
Right. I mean, that's where the large cycle comes. It comes through really loud. We were talking about this the other night.
But you touched on exactly what I meant, Heather, and thank you for elucidating it, or whatever the word is.
Elucidating.
Thank you.
Hallucinating.
Hallucinating.
Yes. Thank you for hallucinating that. But when you raise, there is number one, the Ten Commandments basically was, if I was to read this correctly, if the Ibirus were actually quote unquote the madmen of the desert, then it was probably something very hard to keep a bunch of, functional schizophrenics under control. But if that is even remotely the case, if Julian Jaynes can be believed on that, but let's skip that and just think about the actual nature. Well, the nature of the rules versus the nature, thou shalt not, versus the nature of the I Ching, which is here are the Tao Te Ching, here are the patterns, here's the way that life is, where it becomes more of a philosophy, where there are the virtues of the good ruler, the virtues, those type of things, showing you what you should be as opposed to what you cannot do. And there's this that change in mindset was obviously, as you said, Egyptian, then going through this particular area, and then obviously taking over Rome later. Because let's just face it, at the time, Rome is becoming more and more unvirtuous, ignoble. I don't know what those words are. Degenerate. Yeah. Maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I never really trying to understand. Empire-ish? Well, yeah, but look freedom is one thing, but look at restrictions. Hedonistic. There you go. But it was
Bacchanalian.
Well, it ate itself, and then but what came afterwards was a very large suppression of truth. Pardon?
Gluttonous?
No. Afterwards. Afterwards, they were all that way.
I'm
later.
playing around. So. Go ahead.
No, the church is the one who became the well, it sort of became they basically held control, and all they did with it was basically say, all right, we own everything, and you're like this now. That was the worst type of, I mean, that would be like a continent-wide political shift of, ugh.
But it was so easy to do with illiteracy.
Yeah,
okay, and like
I know.
talking about how like they couldn't read. Okay, they couldn't read. And here's the sirens. Pay attention. Message. They couldn't read, and they slept on dirt floors, and they were peeing on their clothing to keep the like fleas and ticks and shit away from them. You know what I mean? They were dirty people who were eating stew for a week. You know what I mean? Like they walk into this church, and it would be this gigantic monumental building, and the inside of it would be painted blue with golden stars and all of these colorful templates and all of the windows, and there would be telling stories, and it would be up to their eyes, and just
yes, and pictures.
The picture, that was all they would get, was this one stained glass window. That would be the story. And so however it was portrayed in that window, and they would just be in such awe. This has to be God. The majesty of this place. Nothing, I mean, look at where we come from. Look what we see and we live with every day. And we don't think there's anything wrong with it because we've never seen anything else until we walked into this building. Of course, this person is our master. Of course, this person is more powerful than us. You know, and it would keep that level of space between the humans on the ground and the deity in the sky, which was all controlled by humans on the ground.
Yes.
You know.
And the combination of having, okay, this is the good. It's like good cop, bad cop. Here's the church, and here's the military. Yet they're actually they're one and the same underneath the same power control. Yeah.
Well, actually, I think that they had after somehow they managed to dupe everybody into paying fealty to them, including kings. It's very weird how they managed to pull it off.
Yeah. Well, this through think about the
controlling the narrative is what it is.
Well, yeah, but it was also crushing all the other cultures that were in existence. Look at what they did to the Gnostics. You know, they just went in and just
they did that poor Greek philosopher Aphrodisias or whatever her name was there, and she was the last one, wasn't she? I think
that's my little avatar, Hypatia. Yeah. But I mean, that's what they did it by destroying culture. This is often the game, and it's very you know, by definition subversion, you know. So.
Kind of terrible when you think about it.
But they did it with the sword, though. They just went and conquered, and it was.
But we talk about all of these symbolism and all of these shapes and the influence of vibration that flows through things, and it isn't just swords that made these things powerful, and it isn't just their size that made them powerful. It's the vibrational resonance that comes with the buildings of this nature. They weren't built like this on accident, ever. You know, no matter what. And part of that is when you walk into that, you feel the divinity in it. You know, you feel connected to the vibration. It's a higher vibration of a space than, you know, outside of it, at home maybe, in the marketplace.
Dome, you know.
Hey. And all of these ideas of, like, you know, they go all the way up. So it's like the Power of Babel, like as high as we can go, like reach into the sky. Be the pillar, the great pillar, be this gigantic thing that cannot be, this immovable thing. And then when you walk inside of it, it's so delicate and full of grace. Mm-hmm. It's all of these things. I mean, I've taken a lot of classes in symbolism, Gothic architecture, religion, art through the ages, and religion, and all kinds of things. And there's nothing without purpose.
No, it took them 20 years to come up with this idea, the Reformation, to basically say we really need to rebrand ourselves, so to speak. And they went and turned some. You know, older, like finding stuff like murals from the 5th century and stuff are hard because they were sort of remade. It was like they had a big thing. Yeah, let's go spend some money and really know how to suck the people in, and we'll really do these things up. And they turned it into beautiful artwork. A lot of it, especially Renaissance time, it was just 1450s to 1550s or so. I'm not sure exactly when, and they really came out guns a-blazing with this well, this is their version of Buddy Christ, like they came out with this whole new thing, Nope, because they had to compete against people who were going to like Oxford or what was it in Paris, France? There's a university there. I can't remember. I think it is the University of Paris, but it was founded in like 1270 or something, 1170 or something. I don't know when it was, but so they had to compete against this people trying to get more knowledge, basically, and they wanted to keep the masses, and there was this whole council. I think it was the Council of Trent that did this whole thing and came up with this new idea. But look what they turned into. I mean, this is beautiful stuff. It rivaled the older Byzantine stuff, and it really,
right.
captured that grace of Rome. That let's face it, the architectural situation was really problematic prior to a certain time. The ability to, it was in Florence, Italy. There was a gentleman who had to build a dome. I remember watching an entire special on it, actually. And he was a goldsmith. That's what he did for his life. Brunelleschi is his name. And this dome had a span of, like, I think it was like 160 to 180 feet, I think, across. And it was left uncovered. It's been worked on for 100 years to when he finally got a hold of it. And he had to basically suspend that dome there and not use wood. So he invented this whole new pattern of putting bricks together in a herringbone pattern so they would sustain themselves with an arch as they would reach up to the middle and not collapse. And he did that. And that's that kind of thinking, which is, it was really problematic because it was one of the first ones. After that, the knowledge from the ancient Romans and their architecture, and ancient Greeks, I guess, actually, and high load-bearing architecture. And then, of course, we started designing them ourselves, cathedrals and that nature. You can see this in some of the oldest mosques and stuff in Iran and stuff, and all over the world. They have this just huge vaulting architecture, and they're so old, and they were only able to do that because, well, that situation. They managed to hold on to that knowledge, whereas we obviously lost it, and got it back again. So.
Mm-hmm.
But that's
Did we?
Well,
you think so?
Some of it, a lot of it.
Not the transcendent part.
Well,
where it came from? Well, I mean, the motivation to do it. It's kind of we copy. It's the copy part.
Well, the ancient Greeks had that sort of pragmatic philosophy and the birth of science and Aristotelian logic.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he's the one where he's the end all be all. But it's like if you look at it, he's the ultimate empiricist compared to the two before, right? So,
well, yeah.
Socrates, Plato, because they were. And it's all Plato. Socrates never wrote a thing, but it's like that it's much more idealistic, Plato was up in the clouds, where Aristotle is basically, let's put together a lab book and categorize.
I'll never see him any other way again. All I see now, every time you say the word Plato, I think of Dwayne Johnson.
Oh yeah, okay.
Well, once I learned. I can't even believe that I didn't know that was not even his real name. Plato. No one knew Plato's real name. Like, no one knows it now.
Okay.
Because Plato, his name Plato was from when he was a wrestler.
Oh, okay.
And he won the Olympics like 4 times.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he was huge. Like, he was a very large man, and he was because the word Plato means is basically the O. Is a moniker thrown at the end type of thing, but an addition. But Platus is broad. He was broad-shouldered. He's a huge man, and I thinking about him saying something with authority and to be able to get away with his bullshit probably ended with stuff like "I'll fight you for it," because
Right,
because he could. And so I just pictured Dwayne Johnson sitting there, like teaching people, and it would just he's got to make that movie. He's got to make that movie. I totally watched that.
To be Plato?
Him being Plato. Wouldn't that be just the greatest? And especially fighting people, like
do the dialogue,
doing a dialogue, and then actually, because Socrates was arguing with him, and then
Thrasymachus. You ever heard of, I mean, it's in the Republic, but he's like the character that like is irascible, and he's just always a pain in the ass, and it's like that would be
me.
That would be good casting. Yeah, we cast you. Perfect. Yeah.
But what if? Oh, damn him! He said, "What if?"
What if?
Oh, still beautiful work on that stuff. Look how beautiful that is. Those are almost impossible to make, these ancient Roman structures that are still there today. And
this was the Pantheon. Yeah.
Well, yes, and I've heard something.
And Hadrian, that's quite a story. So.
Well, you mean in Scotland?
Well, that's the wall, but he did a lot of other stuff.
Oh, well, fair enough.
Yeah,
but I remember seeing
may his bones rot forever if he would want to bring up the tribal reference.
Well, hear me out. This is kind of weird. I remember I remember seeing a painting of one of this building, or a building like this, and it had no Latin writing on it, and the question becomes, was it added later? Like, what do we really know about what was really going on there? Because they used to have Etruscan, and then apparently they switched to Latin, and they could read Latin, sure, but some of these buildings didn't have it. And I remember there's also old paintings, like from the 1700s or stuff, that show, like, for example, a paint all over the statues at Luxor and stuff like that, temples in Egypt and stuff. And I figured the Berbers would still paint them occasionally, when they were in the area. But, that's the picture right there. Like right at the, like for example, go a little bit up to the top. There's a building there. Maybe I went to there. Okay, up a little bit. That building.
The segways?
No, the building. It's right there. Okay.
Yeah, it's yeah.
There, it's switching. Oh, that's why I couldn't understand what was going on. So, but on the front of it, there's Latin writing at the very front on one of the pictures, and
look at that. That's pretty cool. Right?
I love that. I love that they did that. See, right there. See, there's writing on the front of it. Apparently, in the drawing, there's no writing. You went one too far, but that's fine. Yeah, right there. See how it's the stuff written on the front of it?
Oh, here?
Well, there's paintings of that with no writing on it. And people were wondering, did someone just go up and put that on there, like, during more modern times?
Right.
To give it the idea that it was. Because remember, these buildings were buried under 40 feet of dirt.
This is the Pantheon, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been there. The interior that has the zodiac shape with 12 statues of famous people, whatnot. Mm-hmm. And that's been even remoderated to some degree. I can't remember how or what. It's a long time ago. But many things have been redecorated.
It just makes me question so many things, because as much as I would love to, like we were talking about before, how much do we really know about history? How much is being obscured? And having a talk about it and talking about secret knowledge that people had to transfer to each other without the use of writing, and it could do it just verbally, and with pictures and symbols. And they were able to do it in such a way and pretend to be ignorant. So when the church came by and said, "You're being a good boy, Thomas?" "Yes, sir, I'm being a very good boy. I'm farming my field. I know nothing about anything at all." And then, of course, as soon as he turns his back, these people are sitting there going, "Now this symbol means the, blah, 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 blah." And they're showing the flowers and the stuff and the zodiac symbols and so forth. And people could communicate. I mean, just with a deck of cards, you could learn a lot. a lot more than I could teach myself, I'm sure. So I have to give credit where credit is due. But anyway, it just makes me question history when I see shit like this.
Sure. When were you there, Rita?
Oh, God, that was in 2000, just about.
Okay.
Some training that led me to Rome. That was very nice. And we had an excursion, you do some social, cultural stuff when you're there. And so we visited lots of monuments. They have a lot of that stuff in Rome. And the Pantheon, I actually found one of maybe the most fascinating, actually.
It looks older than that.
Yes, it's older. And as you can see here, it has those niches, if you will, with statues, something. Yes, and they're kind of zodiacal arranged, if you will, right? With the hole in the
number 12 is clearly in this room.
Clearly.
Well, and then the guide, the lady that gave us the tour, if you will, I remember that she talked about rearrangements because of Pope or important persons such and such, and event yada yada. I really can't remember the details, but they did do some shuffling, if you will. So, yeah.
Re-architect?
Uh-huh.
I'm sure it can be found, right? This information.
Well, it's that kind of thing that when you get right down to it, like, the further I go back, the more I think about like Flamenco and what was his name there, Sir Isaac Newton, and both of them were like, yeah, they're lying to you. These cultures are much more recent in the past than we think that they are, and and he's going on hearsay, and it's well, there's some interesting evidence for it, but whether it's true or not, it just makes me question so many things. And I wonder if they could, with all these squares in the wall, if they could tell what time of day it is, what time of year it is by this. Because I noticed that.
Well, this roof, from the top of my mind, it's concrete first of all, right? So you made a dome with concrete. Now that's quite a feat already.
Yep.
To do that, and second of all, what I also know is that this concrete becomes in the average weight per volume, right? It becomes lighter and lighter as you go nearer the hole there. So this was entirely planned and thought through, if you will, from beginning to end, including the mass, the weight, what they were dealing with, in order to maintain the dome. Otherwise, the dome would collapse.
Right. This is a prime example of where, like, the design of the scaffolding to build it is a more involved process than the thing itself. Because it's all the scaffolding is
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was just saying about the other gentleman, Brunelleschi. He managed to win the bid because he could say he would do it without scaffolding. Because over the course of 20 years, how many times would you have to replace the scaffolding and so on and so forth? He also invented machines that basically the oxen could keep spinning in one direction, walking around in a circle to power the turning post, which he could then switch into forward or reverse gear, a gear switching system, so that he could lower and raise stuff and the cattle can keep going in the same direction. That was brilliant. But this is even more so because, as you said, it's concrete. The form to place, or the mold to make it, and then of course all the intricacies within it, and wait for it, remember, 40 feet of dirt hit this place. Like, it's very important to remember that when they went and found Rome, it was completely buried under 40 feet of dirt. And this is they found, again, whole societies, like there was a pyramid in Mexico that has a church on top of it because they didn't know it was a pyramid. They thought it was just a hill. So they built a pyramid, they built a church on top of it, and then they cleared it off and went, oh, it's covered in 10 feet of dirt. Like, did they bury it in themselves? No. Like, when did this happen? When did this suddenly, 10 feet of dirt just cover a pyramid, And then, of course, this belies, tales of, regional devastation, regional catastrophes that didn't affect everything, but affect some things.
Particularly Rome, Neil, is interesting that you mention it, because when I was there, and I think I mentioned this before, a lot of those archaeological digs, they're pretty deep down. I mean, many meters down, right?
Oh, yes.
So this 40 feet sounds just about right. But it's strange because Rome, as far as I can remember, but please correct me if I'm wrong, it's been sacked and plundered and burned quite a few times, but it was always inhabited, right? So how can you have that accumulation, if you will?
Exactly. Well, apparently, this is just going from Julian West, and when he gets on one time, we'll be able to ask him, but it had to do with a strike or a comet and an inundation of Earth. Basically a regional strike, and I thought that was an interesting thing. And this is not the first time we've talked about this. Obviously, there's apparently one that happened in 535, 536 in England, where it killed nearly everything. The vitrified forts type of ideas and stuff like that. There's castles in England that predate history, which people don't even get. Like Edinburgh Castle is older than they have records. No one knows who built it.